Hi, this is Outlaw Bookseller, Stephen E. Andrews, and I thought I'd sort of do a couple of videos about my books of the year. And by books of the year, I'm not really going to go into it in the way that most people are, just looking at what's been published recently in contemporary. It's more about what I've been reading, what I've been interested in. I'm going to try not to cover anything that I've mentioned already as something I've bought or read since I started doing the channel about 3 months ago. So some of these are things which have been published this year, some of them are things which have been reissued, some of them I have in hardcover from last year, they come out in paperback this year, and others are just things I've read this year. Because just to give you an idea of my ethos of reading, being a guy in his late 50s who's worked in the trade a long time, obviously I've read a heck of a lot. And when you're young and you start in the industry, I think you do feel a kind of pressure to sort of be contemporary and keep up with what's going on. And as it goes on, you develop an instinct about what you need to know about, and you have that sort of separately to what you like yourself. And I do have to feel moved to read something just for the sake of it, so I don't read anything just for the sake of it. There was a period, as I say, when I was younger, when I read, for example, a lot of classics, and I don't read many classics now because I've read a heck of a lot. And occasionally I will go back to those things or try ones I haven't read. But the sort of sense of duty reading and of contemporary reading, of having to keep up, have sort of passed me by, because you develop instincts about what you need to know about. And as time goes on, you have less time and you become more aware that you want to focus again, as you did when you were a child, and in a very subjective state, on what you want to read and what you're interested in. So this is purely about the things which I've been discovering or rediscovering this year. I'm going to pick them more or less at random. First, I'm going to pick a reissue of one of my favourite novels, which I'm going to talk about this author and this novel in some depth at some point in two different contexts. One of them will be a reading this rock context. This is the book City of Night by John Reschy, which has been reissued by Serpent's Tail, wonderful publisher. This is the first time there's been a mass market edition of this book in print in the UK since the mid-80s. Souvenir Press, I believe, did a trade paperback of it, which you wouldn't see very much in many years. And this was a debut novel by Reschy, and a very, very famous book in its time. It tends to get pigeonholed as a gay novel, but it's actually more than that. It is a great gay novel for anybody who's interested in that genre or, of that persuasion. But the fact is, it's something that anybody could read. And it's an autobiographical novel about a young man from Texas who leaves home and he drifts across the cities of America to California and New York, where he sells his body. And it's more of a sort of late Beat Generation classic. The writing's fantastic, good real feel of America in the 60s. And what comes across in it is a wonderful attitude. So that's out there now. Anybody who's interested in American fiction should read this book. Anybody who's interested in the underground should read it. And I would kind of describe it as a bit like Transformer by Lou Reed in literary form, but a bit more sober and serious. So that's City of Night by John Reschy, fantastic novel. Moving on, something I've just bought, haven't read yet. It's just come out as a paperback original, is Ken MacLeod's new novel, Beyond the Hallowed Sky. Ken MacLeod, Scots science fiction writer, really great guy. And I'm a bit disappointed that there's no hardcover of this, which I think is a great shame. I think this is the first time that one of Ken's books has come out as a paperback original, and it's published by Orbit. And I see that as a real indictment of the state of science fiction and fantasy publishing in the UK. That one of our foremost practitioners, this guy was in school with Ian M. Banks and they were best friends, he's a better writer in my opinion, who writes good, solid, hard SF, but with a left-wing bent, and that even people like me, I'm not a huge space opera and hard SF fan, can enjoy. And it's a great shame that there isn't a hardcover of this, and I think that's shocking. Orbit, get your act together and get Ken back into hardcover. He deserves it. So I've got that to read, looking forward to that. Some of the most exciting reissues this year. There have been some great reissues from Penguin Modern Classics, the finest reissue imprint in the world, and some that I snapped up immediately to replace all copies with and to get a couple of books I didn't have. Were these ones by Kobo Abe, Japanese writer, The Ruin Map, which is a kind of metaphysical detective story, and The Box Man, which is the story of a man who goes around with a cardboard box on his head. Yeah, these are quite bizarre. And Secret Rendezvous, which is another kind of metaphysical detective story. And I'm going to talk about Bay at some length in the future. He's a Japanese writer. He's dead now. He was active in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Bestseller. He's a bit like Kafka. Very hard to describe. He wrote science fiction novels as well. He actually wrote the first full-length Japanese science fiction novel, and his later SF novel, The Ark Sakura, was published in Penguin this year, but absolutely beautiful as ever. So if you like Japanese fiction, he's really somebody you should look at. His most famous book is a book called Woman of the Dunes, which has been in PMC for decades, and I read it a long time ago. And it came out in the 60s, and I think it's an influence of a Ballard's Concrete Island, and I'll talk about that when I talk about a Bay in more depth. But watch out for these because they're really, really great. They're really beautiful. They haven't had an enormous presence in bookshops, so do watch out for them. Something else I've just acquired is a book which came out last year by a friend of mine. Let me just go around to getting it, and that's The Beasts of Lake Off by Tom Toner, who's my mate. He lives in Bath. And I'm going to do an interview with him on camera at some point when this pandemic thing recedes a bit more, and he's busy writing and teaching. And this was published by Newcon, a small publisher. This is a signed limited edition of I think only 50 copies in hardcover. This is number 18, and I'll get him to scrawl some nonsense over that, because we always have a bit of a laugh when we do that. And it's quite interesting because Tom's books are quite big, and this is only about 70 pages long, so it'd be really nice to sort of read that. So that's going to be like a nice little sweetie to chew up and suck and enjoy. So it's going to be fantastic. Lovely cover as well. So nice stuff there from Newcon. Again, on the genre front, a reissue this year, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading in hardcover, and you've heard me mention this name several times this year, is Jack Vance. This is Marazian the Magician, which is better known as The Dying Earth. This is a publisher called Spatterlight Press, who seem to have got hold of Jack Vance's back catalogues. He's dead now, sadly. And they're reissuing them, and most of them in dreadful trade paperbacks. They're horrible because they print on demand, and it's what they can afford. I don't like the covers at all, but they are getting them into print. But they did this one as a laminated boards hardcover, and this is a really wonderful, elegant book. It was the stories were first published in 1950, and it is a novel, but it's fixed up from a series of stories, and a character is introduced in the story, then another character, and it moves from one character to another throughout this story, and is set at the end of time where science and magic are kind of interchangeable. And the writing is just beautiful. I've said before that if Shakespeare had written science fantasy, this is what he would have written. Absolutely lovely. If you've not read The Tales of the Dying Earth, pick them up. They are an elegant, witty, sophisticated, verbally explosive antidote to the formulaic rubbish that's being produced today in the world of fantasy writing. So really great stuff, and nice and brief. You know, you're talking quality here. Great stuff. So Marazian the Magician, and you can get that online. You won't see it in bookshops, I don't think. Something which I actually picked up last year, and I read the first part of this year, because even though I love him, I tend to wait until I'm in the mood. It's the second in William Gibson's current trilogy, and this is Agency, which I got actually at the very beginning of last year, and this year I read The Peripheral, which is the book that comes before this, which actually came out 7 years ago. With Gibson, I like to leave big gaps and wait till I'm in the mood. I've actually read this one yet, but I read Peripheral, and I have to say I wasn't that fussed on it, so we'll see. But I did want to give him a mention because he is one of my favourite writers, and I'm aware I've not mentioned him very much yet. So I'm looking forward to this one. I'm hoping it's going to be a step up from the first one, because his previous work, the Blue Ant trilogy, is absolutely fantastic. So that's something to look forward to. Maybe I'll squeeze it in before the end of the year. We'll see. Something that I read earlier in the year, I mentioned in one of my 100 best SF things, that a book I was very keen on is a book called Dogs of War by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which came out in 2018. This is the sequel, Bearhead, which came out in hardcover late last year and paperback early this year. And this is good. It's set on Mars, and I think it's not quite as good as Dogs of War. I do think Adrian, he suffers from he's really popular, but he suffers from the fact that his most popular books are probably his least interesting, in my view. This was great fun. This was a bit of a romp, and it has some ideas in it which I came across in a much older science fiction novel a while ago, which I don't think he was, which was a Stanislaw Lem novel called The Invincible, which I mentioned in my Lem roundup a while ago. And some of the ideas in that come up in this, and I'm wondering whether Adrian's aware of them or not, because Lem's work I don't think is that widely read amongst the younger SF writers. So if I ever meet him, I'm going to ask him. But yeah, Dogs of War, Bearhead, well worth a read. A brilliant book, which again came out last year in hardcover and published this year in paperback, is The Sunken Land Begins to Rise Again by M. John Harrison, who's one of my favourite living writers. I consider him, alongside Christopher Priest, the two best science fiction writers in the world. This is the book of Mike's that I've enjoyed the most this century, and it's very hard to describe. It's set in London. Two middle-aged people come into contact. They've both gone through traumatic experiences, breakdowns of relationships, what have you. The main character in this is a man. He takes a job as a kind of caretaker on a barge. And there is something very strange going on in the background around water. And there's an obsession in this with two things: compression tights, which obviously maybe Mike is wearing because he's getting older, and the water babies. And it's really interesting. It's sort of, Mike sort of writes rather like, if you could imagine that Alan Bennett wasn't such a bore, but really good on observation of what people are actually like, people of all ages, with some sort of high strangeness, then you'd have it. And this one, the Goldsmiths Prize. And the Goldsmiths Prize, obviously related to Goldsmith College, the art college in London, is for fiction that pushes the boundaries of the form of the novel. Mike's always done this. And I was delighted to see he'd won that. And I think it's about 10k, so good for him. And it really is something very special and indefinable. One of my books of the year in paperback. So do get it and give it a try. It's very, very unexpected and interesting. And flavoursome prose always from him. Marvellous stuff. Something I bought, again, it's come out in paperback this year. And I'm not sure, I think I might have read it early this year, maybe late last year. Was this book. The cover really grabbed me, and this is Little Eyes by Samantha Schweblin. Now, Samantha Schweblin had a little minor bestseller called Fever Dream a few years ago, which I didn't pay a lot of attention to, but I was grabbed by all the pandas on the cover, which look kind of super cute, but they're a bit spooky as well. And it was longlisted, as it says, for the 2020 International Booker Prize. So I think this is a first. I think that it got onto the shortlist while it was still in proof copy form. Yeah, it is. And it was published in Spanish. Where is she from? I think it's somewhere in South America. Let's just check. Buenos Aires. So she's Argentine, lives in Berlin. So it's nice international stuff. And this is really good, and ostensibly it is SF. It's set a few minutes in the future where there's a new online craze for these little toys, which are called Kentakus, I think. And they are like little robots, and you buy one, and when you buy one, you activate it, and it sends a video signal to somebody else on the web. And you don't know who it sends the video signal to, but through the eyes of the Kentaku, that anonymous person gets to observe your life. So it's very sort of voyeuristic and strange, and it opens with a very disturbing chapter, and it looks at the way the Kentakus affect the lives of any number of people, and some people see it as an opportunity, some as a threat. And what's wonderful about it is it doesn't really resolve, and I really like that, because of course once technology's with us, you can't lose it. It doesn't become obsolete. It gets replaced by something else. The tape recorder never became obsolete. It became replaced by digital recording, what have you. So it's about how technology doesn't go away and it becomes part of things, and you just have to accept it. It reminded me a little bit of Bob Shaw's Other Days, Other Eyes in a way. But it's really, really good. I really enjoyed it. And it's well worth a look. And it says, they're everywhere, they're here, they're us. So it's observational and doesn't resolve, and I really enjoyed it. Spooky stuff. It's really good. The writing's really fantastic. The translation is obviously translated to Spanish. Really, really good. I really enjoyed that. Something I've not read yet, because I'm several books behind with him, but I do think he's one of Britain's most interesting writers, especially in the mode of SF, is Adam Roberts. This is Purgatory Mount. This came out around about March or April, and he's great. And it says on the cover, a smart and ingenious writer, Christopher Priest. Now, Chris has actually critiqued Adam a lot early in his career. He's now produced about 20 odd novels, and his last novel that I read that I thought was amazing was The Thing Itself, which is a fantastic book about Kantian philosophy in SF. This looks a bit more traditional, but what I like about Adam is he doesn't repeat himself. He doesn't do the same. He does have a little series called The Real-Time Murders. He's done 2 of those, and I think that's Golank's pushing him to try and get a series out of him. But his sort of aim has always been that he would cover every possible trope and do books with different things. He doesn't always hit the mark, but I really like him, so I'm looking forward to that. So I'll read that at some point. It's on the huge pile of to be read SF. So it's Adam Roberts. If you've not read Adam Roberts, pick something up by him, because he's always really entertaining. Sometimes he's witty, sometimes he's serious, but he always has great ideas. And like I say, he's like Philip K. Dick, different thing every time, and that's the essence of truly great SF writing. This series business, that's not great SF writing. It hardly ever works. A classic I went back to this year, because I'm aware I haven't really covered many classics on this channel. I do want to do that, because I do like unusual classics. This is a really famous book, but it's a book which isn't as widely read as it should be. And also people tend to read abridged or adapted versions of it, is Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. This is a Penguin cloth-bound classic. People absolutely love these. They lap them up. And I hadn't read it for a very long time. I went back to it. And, you know, it is... I think there was a poll was run somewhere about what's the most difficult classic to read, and this came up. And I'm sure there are more difficult ones. I mean, I struggle with George Eliot. I mean, some of the classic English social novels I find really boring, you know, and... As Woody Allen once said, don't do any course where they make you read Beowulf. I completely disagree. I love Beowulf. But this is really quite hard going and satirical, obviously. But it was great to go back to it, and you forget how deeply strange it is and how it's not a kid's book, you know. So it was good to go back to that. Rereading's an important thing. So after a very long time, I was delighted to revisit that. So maybe more classics next year. We'll see. At the moment, I'm reading the second crime novel by Jeff Noon, House with No Doors, which I wish he'd called House Without Doors. That would have sounded a bit more sort of, you know, modern classic-y. And I'm sort of more than halfway through that. And just talking about Jeff Noon a bit, Jeff Noon made a big splash in the early 90s with a book called Vert, which I read at the time. And this is an American first, which I only acquired this year. And I acquired it because I was so blown away by what I read by Jeff this year. I read this at the time, and it was published by Sort of Books in Manchester. And it's an SF novel. It has sort of... It reminded me a lot of the first Jerry Cornelius books. And I thought, yeah, it's okay, but it's not anything I haven't seen before. There's some quite clever stuff in it. But I actually read Jeff's novel Slow Motion Ghosts, which is the precursor to this, earlier this year. My friend Tim said I should read it, and I'd thought of it. I'd been looking at it and considering it, because I'd not read for a long time. And both Slow Motion Ghosts and House with No Doors are police procedurals about a detective called Hobbs who works in London. They're set in 1981, and they've got lots of sort of period colour, and they're really good because Hobbs has a kind of ability when he goes to a crime scene. There's nothing supernatural or fantastic about it, but he likes to be on his own with the dead body in the murder scene, and he just starts to think about it. And he is a really brilliant detective, but he keeps having these cases which are very, very strange. They always seem to relate back to cult things or secrets or bizarre practices from the past. So they're very haunting and haunted. So they have more of the feel of good sort of late 80s urban sort of horror, the kind of thing that Christopher Fowler did short stories about, except that they're actually better written in my view. As much as I like Chris's work, I do think they're really good, and they're extremely entertaining. They haven't had great support from bookshops, sadly, which is a real shame. So, you know, if you're a crime fan, or if you're not, if you want to read a police procedural and you're not a crime fan, I really recommend Slow Motion Ghosts and House with No Doors. I'm going to devote a video just to these at some point, but they are fantastic things. I'm going to finish part one with a little bit of non-fiction, another 2 books again, which I'm going to devote an entire video to because they had such a big impact on me. I read a lot of non-fiction early in the year. I found that I was very bored with novels and I didn't really want to read fiction, so I read lots of non-fiction. And the 2 non-fiction books I've enjoyed the most were Hauntology, Ghosts of Futures Past by Merlin Coverley, and Retromania by Simon Reynolds. Retromania is subtitles, Pop Culture's Addiction to Its Own Past. Now, I'd read Simon Reynolds before, very good music journalist, just a little bit younger than me. He wrote a book called Rip It Up and Start Again, which is about British indie music, which is a fantastic little history book. It's really, really good. And as it says about how pop is addicted to its own past. And he's one of these people who, for him, after a certain date, there didn't seem to be anything new in music. And for me, that date is about 1983. For him, it's about the same. But then he does get interested in dance music, which is something that's never really did much for me. There's the odd thing. And he talks about, I want to hear something new, something genuinely new, rather than cut and paste of postmodernism. And it is good. And it does tie in with this hauntology. As I say, I'm going to do a video just about these two because the concepts are quite woolly and thorny and they need a clip of their own. Hauntology, to sum it up, is nostalgia for a future that we've never had, and it afflicts people who were kids in the 60s and 70s, maybe very early 80s, when the image of the future that we had never ever came, and we've been haunted by it ever since. I'm not going to say any more about that now, but if you buy only one non-fiction book this year, buy this one. It's absolutely fantastic. So that's part one of my books of the year. There will be more to come. I'm sort of going shelf by shelf really, and I won't be reading everything I've read, just some of the things which just pop up. So this is Outlaw Bookseller. Part two of that will come soon. Bye for now.